And now on Nights with Steve Price from the 50UP Club, Christopher Zinn.
Christopher, good evening to you.
Yes, good evening, Steve.
We're going to talk about the buying power of 50UP Club members and the actual buying power of people over the age of 50 tonight, because I think we need to restate just what a powerful bunch of people they are. And we often say this, 60 is the new 50, 50 is the new 40. Unlike our parents, these people aren't starting to wither and die. They're actually still got a lot of disposable income.
Yeah, $5 in every $10 of national household buying power belongs to people over 50. So, yeah, we are a demographic bulge and we are moving through, but we do represent significant buying power, and that's something that one has a lot of political clout because we vote, but, you know, what kind of markets we patronise and how we do that counts. But also it does make it attractive for various people to make offers to a group of people over 50, and perhaps, you know, the insurance is an example of that, where we've had car insurance offers because, you know, those tend to be more experienced people. And again, why would over 50s bear the cost of higher risk drivers who tend, I say, to be younger?
There's a lot of challenges for government in this field, and I know that's why 50UP Club exists, because governments, I don't think, quite understand the power of this group, but they also don't understand the peculiar difficulties that this age bracket has. We've got a lot of people, particularly over 60, who are asset rich with real estate, but perhaps cash flow poor, and particularly those that are, say, 62 and over, that almost missed that start of superannuation, that you know, if they don't want to move out of their principal residence, they're finding it difficult to make ends meet on a weekly cash flow basis, but they're sitting maybe on $1 million property.
Exactly, and that's where it does make the hackles rise a bit when you hear people claiming, you know, that there are people with assets over $1 million and we're going to trim back the budget, the pension for them or whatever. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of how liquid are those assets? How can they use them? And while over 50s generally have, lived in a blessed time, not all of them, of course, in terms of asset appreciation, those who've had houses and everything else, it's not, of course, everyone, and those assets are not always liquid and not always in a way that they can use for day-to-day living. So, yeah, it is. They are. I hate to say anyone is a special case, but this is a big group, and a lot of the rules have changed, and I suppose it's as they've grown up, they've changed rules by dint of their very great numbers, but also how they've changed. We've changed the world that we've lived in. I hope generally for the best. Some might take issue for that. It's still going on.
The downsizing argument, which is what confronts all of us at some stage, is not necessarily easy either. I mean, it's not just a matter of selling your quarter-acre block house in suburban Sydney and, you know, downsizing to a unit or an apartment, because you might not have the cash gap that you need to live in the same area where you've been living. You might not want to go and live on the Central Coast or on the South Coast. You might want to stay in Sydney. And part of the problem, Christopher, is with real estate prices going where they're going, a lot of people are going to be forced out of the Sydney basin.
Look, I'm talking to you from Bondi, where I live, and that's been a very live issue with older people who want to stay here but can't afford it because there's been an explosion in prices, and where people like the Benevolent Society have wanted to develop, Pacific housing for retirees, and there's people who argue against it, and it hasn't happened. So, yeah, there's some big policy shifts need to take place around housing, and I think a recognition that, people, not surprisingly, do want to stay close to the areas that they've grown up in and family and friends might be in, and there's lots of evidence that there's actually better for their health and might even cause them to be less of a burden on the health service when they stay with communities and places that they know.
Let's talk electricity. It's been in the news again this week. Bill Shorten says, well, by 2030, we would like 50% of Australia's energy to come from renewables. He doesn't accept that would drive up the cost of electricity. The coalition says exactly the opposite, that it's more expensive to generate power through wind and sun, which is where this new renewable energy come from. So that would mean electricity costs would go up. It's a hot button issue, and you've been polling the 50-ups to find out what they think.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, there's no doubt that they think what is important in terms of the long-term interests of consumers is lower cost electricity. So this is an inquiry that's going on in terms of the Competition Tribunal. I think we've discussed this before. But when we have asked them, they do believe that, in fact, the long-term interest of consumers is perhaps less in that green space in terms of environmental protection and more in the lower cost. And it's not surprising. There's some figures out today in terms of the increase of electricity prices over the past 10 years. It's 116% nationally, second only to tobacco. Now, tobacco has been pushed up by excise duties and, of course, calls to tax tobacco out of people's reach for health reasons. But electricity, some of that has been green taxes, of course, but a lot has, of course, been the network and the distribution costs. So, yeah, people are very sensitive over the price of electricity. And while many may feel there are issues around the environment and what we should do, I think they'd be arguing that electricity is perhaps not the way to seek those goals.
I mentioned last week that I had some inefficient heating at home and it had been freezing. It hasn't been much better this week, a little bit, but not much better. You've also been blogging, I think, on the 50UP Club website on tips on how to be better, more efficient with energy.
Yeah, and look, what's interesting about this too is the University of Wollongong, and I mentioned this, they surveyed 1,000 low-income residents over 60 in the Illawarra, etc., and found that while they had a very keen sense of being thrifty, and I'm sure this applies to many 50-ups, they actually weren't necessarily energy efficient wise. So, they wouldn't turn on lights and they'd stand on stools to unplug microwaves and they'd fall off or come a cropper. So seems to be a big bit of work, public education in terms of what energy efficiency really means, and it doesn't just mean being thrifty. So, look, I mean, obviously heating uses a great deal, and cooling uses a great deal of the budget. That's the most intense. But, you can turn down a bit the temperature on the hot water. That can save considerable amounts without great discomfort. And again, I think something 50-up people would probably be, or older Australians, more aware of is just the simple things to do around drafts and curtains and shading and fans, which are actually low-tech, low-energy solutions to heating and cooling, and they actually work. Not for all people in all places, but certainly, I would suggest to people, look, and there's various government sites which give lots of good tips in detail. Don't just presume that everything you or your parents might have done, in the 50s to save electricity really still makes sense.
Well, you could do what I did and go to bed with a hoodie, tracksuit pants and 2 doonas.
Well, look, certainly I love my hot water bottle, and we've had some really cold nights, and that makes a lot of sense. But there again, people get scolded with hot water bottles too.
Exactly.
So I suppose we need to give a safety warning for that too.
Great to catch up, Christopher. I'll talk to you next week.
All the best. Thank you, Steve.
Christopher Zinn from the 50UP Club.